Harvard expert, the 5 types of bosses you never want to work for or become. No one wants to become a horrible boss, let alone work for one, and Harvard expert has a new guide for identifying and avoiding them. Bill George, a senior fellow at Harvard Business School and former CEO of medical technology company Medtronic, has spent almost 20 years studying leadership failures in the workplace. Bosses are inevitably doomed when they lose sight of their true north, George tells CNBC, make it, referring to their deeply held beliefs, values, and purpose as leaders. Those traits help guide people to make good decisions and lead effectively. He explains, they're what makes you authentic, and people naturally want to follow authentic leaders. Losing your sight of your values has nothing to do with how smart you are, George notes. It happens when you get distracted by extrinsic motivations like money, fame, and power, all at the expense of your moral compass. Last week, George and co-author Zach Clayton published a new book, True North, Leading Authentically in Today's Workplace, Emerging Leader Edition. The book identifies 5 different archetypes of bosses that you never want to become or work for because they've lost their true north in some way. Here's what they are and why George says those bosses are bound to fail. Number 1, imposters. Imposters fight relentlessly to get the top of organizations, buying their spot with charm and appealing ideas, George says. But once they get to the top, they have no idea how to effectively lead because they lack a sense of self-awareness. These bosses don't have an accurate depiction of their own character, actions, or feelings, and they struggle to recognize how other people see them, George says. That's a problem. Self-awareness helps bosses understand what's going right and wrong in their leadership. It shows them how their actions may be helping or hurting employees and what they can improve to lead them more effectively. Take WeWork founder and ex-CEO Adam Neumann as an example. Neumann won over investors with charm and charisma, ultimately raising $10.4 billion from conglomerate holding company SoftBank. But he didn't have the self-awareness to lead effectively the company day-to-day, George says. Instead, Newman's erratic management style harmed employees, and his efforts to keep expanding the company with little planning led to WeWork's first failed attempt to go public in 2019, George says. Number 2, rationalizers. Rationalizers always want to appear like they've always on top of everything they do, George says. They're also masters of denial who are never willing to acknowledge and learn from their mistakes, instead rationalizing missteps and wrongdoing by blaming others. George's go-to example is Rajat Gupta, the former managing partner of global consulting firm McKinsey. George even knows Gupta personally. They served together on 3 boards, including Goldman Sachs in 2008. In 2012, Gupta was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison after sharing inside information about a $5 billion investment Warren Buffett made in Goldman to Rajaratnam, the founder of hedge fund management firm Galleon Group. Rajaratnam used that information to make insider trades, generating $90 million in illicit profits. Gupta has since maintained his innocence, blaming Rajaratnam for making him a victim in the scandal, George says. The stance has hurt Gupta's ability to lead effectively since getting out of prison, he adds. It's proof that he can't or won't lead from his mistakes. Number 3, glory seekers. Glory seekers define their worth based on the amount of money they rake in, how much positive press they get, and how many prominent titles they can accumulate, George says. They prioritize personal fame and fortune over building organizations with lasting value, and are never truly satisfied with what they have, he adds. George points to Greg Lindenberg, the founder of private equity firm Global Growth. Lindenberg started with a successful strategy for acquiring broken businesses and growing their revenue. Ultimately, that wasn't good enough for him, so he began acquiring insurance businesses with the goal of loaning their assets to other businesses he owned, a process limited by laws in multiple states. In 2020, Lindenberg was sentenced to more than 7 years in prison for bribery and conspiracy to commit wire fraud, after attempting to bribe North Carolina's insurance commissioner to bend those laws in his favor. Number 4, loners. Loners, not to be confused with introverts, avoid forming close relationships and support networks, said George. They think they can do everything on their own and often choose to reject feedback or advice they receive from employees, board members, and mentors. As a result, they're prone to mistakes and setting their organizations up for failure, George says. One example is Dick Falt, the former CEO of the Lehman Brothers, formerly the nation's 4th largest investment bank. In 2008, Fold's associates spent months warning him about deep troubles his bank was in. It needed to recapitalize or essentially replace the debt it racked up with more capital, according to George. The U.S. Treasury Secretary at the time, Hank Paulson, even weighed in with similar warnings, but Fold was a loner who didn't listen to others, so he failed to act, George says. Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy later in 2008. Number 5. Shooting stars. Shooting stars focus entirely on getting ahead, said George. They often jump to the next job position, organization, or goal without taking the time to learn from their mistakes. George says the strategy helps them move up rapidly, but it then unfit to lead. They end up crashing and burning fast, he says. One example, Uber founder Travis' quick rise and fall. Kalanick's tunnel vision focused on getting ahead, which meant prioritizing his ride-sharing app's growth and profits. Initially, that's rapid success. It also enabled his stunning downfall just 8 years after he founded the company. By 2017, Uber was engulfed in controversy over the toxic workplace culture he fostered, sexual harassment complaints, and regulators claiming that Uber broke transportation laws. Kalanick resigned that year under demands from 5 of Uber's major investors.